Welcome to Tunacheki's Africa True Story. When the COVID pandemic began, the likes of philanthropist Melinda Gates did numerous interviews with predictions that Africa would be the worst hit continent and even went as far as saying that African streets would be filled with dead bodies if the West did not act. Shock on her and many others when her predictions didn't bear any fruit, as the African continent has experienced fewer COVID-19 casualties than initially predicted by experts and philanthropists. Africa as a continent is currently recording around 250,000 COVID casualties compared to almost 1 million deaths recorded in the USA alone. While infections spread worldwide, cases have been declining across the African continent due to different social and environmental factors that include strong public health measures, quick responses, and previous experience and preparedness in dealing with pandemics. Africa was also equipped with health and community workers with training and knowledge in dealing with such situations who went door to door, mobilizing populations to get tested. Africa has not witnessed an exponential spread of COVID-19 as many in the West had anticipated, and this came as a shock to them who expected the worst for the continent. Most African countries have already brought down restrictions that were introduced during the onset of the pandemic and are on the way to resuming to normal life pre-pandemic. Although the first strain of the virus was first found in Wuhan, China, in the onset of the pandemic, Africans in China were subjected to a number of racial stereotyping. This included acts like forceful testing, being barred from hotels, shops and restaurants, and being accused of carrying and spreading the virus, just to name a few incidences in the number of racial injustices. Aside from the economic challenges and death tolls the pandemic has brought to the world, Africans and other ethnic groups have been suffering from the racial abuse, harassment, and violent events in public spaces. The United Nations, through the General Assembly, although emphasized that there is no space for any form of racism, xenophobia, and discrimination in response to the pandemic. This was far from what was happening on the ground. Unfortunately, the coronavirus has been a pandemic of racism, as many racist movements, white supremacists, Chinese people, and European elites have used this pandemic to attain their racial goals and policies, sustaining their claims as superiors. In a nutshell, the COVID-19 pandemic has incited racial discrimination against Africans as if Africans were the virus themselves. Western mainstream media outlets resorted to sensationalism using racist language while reporting on the health situation the world over. An example was demonstrated by the racist cartoon published by the Spanish newspaper La Tribuna, which depicted black South Africans as the Omicron COVID variant. Their bodies were drawn in the shape of the virus, and they were shown on a boat labeled Omicron, flying the South African flag. This cartoon depicted black people and Africans as both vectors and inherent harborers of disease, which originally came from Europe. Racist and reactionary government interventions from predominantly white Western countries like the UK, in response to the discovery of the Omicron, introduced rushed spontaneous travel restrictions with red lists almost exclusively made of African countries, so much so that it had been labeled a blacklist. The US and Canada were among other Western countries to have a black red list. However, if one looked at Nigeria, an African country on the list, it had recorded just 3 cases at the beginning of the variant, while countries like the Netherlands and Portugal both had 19 cases recorded but had not featured on these red lists. The pandemic also shed light on the selfishness, greed, and blatant racism that saw Western countries and pharmaceutical companies hoard vaccines and send expired vaccines to the global South. What particularly angered global South leaders is that while Western countries like the United States and the UK were offering third shots to their own citizens, many countries in the South had been unable to offer the majority of their population even the first shot. 6 billion doses have been administered globally, but 3/4 have gone to just 10 countries. Britain had fully vaccinated 67% of its people, while the figure for the whole African continent was at 3%, which is ironic considering the amount of COVID deaths in the UK. In addition, There has been an obsession since the pandemic began of how and why the epicenters of the virus have been Europe and North America and not the continent of Africa. There have been constant probing into the validity of death rates produced by African countries, which has promoted heated discussions, debates, and headlines about why death rates across the continent are so low. This suggests that there was an expectation for the continent to be ravaged by the virus, feeding into the narrative that Black people, particularly Africans, are harborers of disease. World leaders, governments, international organizations, and NGOs with the likes of Melinda Gates Foundation had committed emergency funds for Africa's CDC to fight the virus in anticipation of a huge blowout despite fewer casualties and infections. This was ironic in that the funds should have been taken to the worst-hit countries instead. This situation can be used to best describe the white savior mentality the West shows upon itself, forgetting to deal with its own population and always expecting the worst from Africa. Recently, China has forced its people back into lockdown as the country is facing the worst COVID outbreak in the last 2 years. Despite all of this, Africa has proven its resilience and is on its path to being a COVID-free continent soon. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, follow, share, and don't forget to like this video. It's the best way of supporting this channel. You can directly support This African True Story by becoming our YouTube member, Patreon, or donor, and remember, Africa is watching.